Her breath was ragged, her violet eyes locked onto the human standing above her. She had prepared for death, but instead, he did something she never could have predicted. Neri's hands trembled as she pressed them against the cold, blood-stained ground, her body weak from the battle she had barely survived. The air reeked of burnt metal and smoke, the ruins of the battlefield stretching endlessly in every direction. Her people, the Aouri, had fought fiercely against the humans, but they had lost. And now, as she lay there, wounded and helpless, she knew that this was the end. Above her, the human soldier loomed, his uniform tattered, his armor scratched from combat. His face was unreadable, but his weapon was steady, aimed directly at her chest. The final shot. She had always heard stories about human cruelty, how they saw the Aouri as nothing more than invaders, monsters to be eradicated. There was no mercy in war. If their positions had been reversed, her own commanders would have demanded she finish the job without hesitation. So why was he hesitating? Neri swallowed hard, lifting her chin despite the weakness in her limbs. If she was going to die, she would meet her fate with dignity. "Do it," she rasped, her voice barely above a whisper. The human didn't move. Seconds stretched into eternity as his piercing gaze remained locked onto hers. Then, with a slow exhale, he lowered his weapon. Neri's mind barely had time to process what had just happened before the human crouched beside her, pulling something from his belt, a medical injector. She recoiled instinctively, expecting some final cruel trick. But instead of pain, she felt a cool sensation as the injector delivered its contents into her bloodstream. Within moments, warmth spread through her veins, the dull agony of her wounds fading slightly. "Why?" she managed to whisper. The human Jake, as his name tag read, didn't answer immediately. His jaw clenched, as if warring with himself over something. Finally, he muttered, "Because this war is built on lies. A war of lies." The battlefield had once been a colony city, its towering buildings now reduced to shattered husks. The war between humans and Aouri had raged for years, each side blaming the other for the initial conflict. Propaganda fueled the hatred. Humans were told the Aouri were expansionist invaders, seeking to dominate their worlds. The Aouri believed humanity had launched an unprovoked attack, slaughtering their diplomats and taking their colonies by force. Jake had believed it too until now. He had fought in this war for years, had seen countless battles, had lost friends and comrades. But today, he had stumbled upon something that made him question everything, a data terminal hidden beneath the wreckage, containing classified transmissions between human and Aouri officials. And the truth was far more horrifying than any battlefield he had ever faced. This war was not an accident. It was engineered. Jake had spent hours skimming the recovered files while moving through enemy territory. The messages revealed secret communications between corrupt human corporations and rogue Aouri leaders, powerful entities that profited from endless war. They had manipulated entire civilizations, fabricating attacks, assassinations, and betrayals to keep the cycle of bloodshed going. It made him sick. Now, kneeling beside an injured enemy who had likely been fed the same lies as he had, Jake made a choice that would change everything. He would not be another pawn in this game. An unlikely alliance. Neri's sharp gaze never left Jake as he finished dressing her wounds. She still didn't understand his motives, why a human soldier, her enemy, would choose to save her rather than kill her. "You had every reason to let me die," she said finally. "Your people hate mine." Jake met her gaze. "And yours hate mine." She couldn't argue with that. "You don't trust me," he stated. "Should I?" she countered. Jake sighed, running a hand through his dirt-streaked hair. "No. But if we want to make it out of here alive, we don't have a choice. That caught her attention. What do you mean? Jake gestured toward the ruined battlefield around them. We're in no man's land, stranded between both our armies. Neither side will take us in. If human forces find you, they'll execute you on sight. If your people find me, well, I doubt they'd welcome me either. Neri clenched her jaw. He was right. As much as she hated to admit it, her own commanders would likely order his death without hesitation. So what do you propose? She asked warily. Jake pulled a small data drive from his pocket and held it up between them. This contains proof that our war is a lie. That we've been manipulated from the start. Her breath caught. You expect me to believe that? Believe it or not, I don't care, Jake replied. But I need help getting this information out. And right now, you're my best shot. Neri stared at him, struggling to process everything. Her entire life had been built around the belief that humans were the enemy. That their war was a righteous one. But if what he said was true, if there was even a chance that their conflict had been fabricated, then everything she had ever fought for was meaningless. She exhaled sharply. What's the plan? The hunt begins. Their alliance was uneasy, built on necessity rather than trust. But it didn't matter. Survival was the priority. The wreckage of the city provided temporary shelter, but they both knew it wouldn't last. Patrols from both sides were closing in, searching for survivors. Jake had already spotted a drone sweeping overhead soon. Their location would be compromised. We need to move, he said. Neri nodded, gritting her teeth as she forced herself to stand. Her wounds ached, but the human's medical treatment had helped. Enough to keep going. Their objective was clear: reach a neutral communications array far beyond the battlefield and transmit the data to every major channel across both civilizations. If they could get the truth out, they might have a chance to stop the war before it claimed more lives. But the journey would be treacherous. As they slipped through the ruins, staying to the shadows, Neri finally broke the silence. You never told me why you're doing this. Jake didn't answer immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet. Because I lost someone I cared about. And now I know she died for nothing. Neri watched him carefully, noting the pain in his expression. She didn't push further. For now, they had a mission. And the enemy was closing in. The ruined city stretched before them like the skeleton of a forgotten civilization. Towering buildings, shattered by years of war, loomed like ghosts in the night. Fires still smoldered in the distance, their smoke rising into the sky, mixing with the thick fog that clung to the streets. Somewhere beyond the wreckage, the war still raged, but here, in this graveyard of steel and stone, only silence remained. Jake led the way, his steps careful as he navigated the rubble-strewn path. Neri followed, her breathing shallow, her wounds still aching despite the treatment he had given her. Every movement was a reminder of how close she had come to death. She should have been dead. Yet here she was, walking beside a human soldier, the very enemy she had been trained to kill. And now, he was her only hope of survival. The irony burned in her chest. They moved in silence, both hyper-aware of the danger surrounding them. Enemy patrols could be anywhere, scanning for survivors. If either side found them, there would be no negotiations, only execution. Neri gritted her teeth. The thought of dying didn't frighten her as much as the possibility of dying for nothing. If Jake's information was true, if their entire war had been orchestrated, then she couldn't afford to fall before the truth was revealed. She glanced at him, noting the tension in his posture. He moved like a predator, every step calculated. His face was hard, unreadable, but beneath that, she could sense something else. Guilt. It lingered in his eyes, in the way his fingers clenched around his weapon. He had lost someone. She had seen that pain before. She carried it herself. But now wasn't the time for questions. A sudden noise shattered the silence. A low hum, mechanical and predatory, echoed through the ruins. Drones? Jake swore under his breath, grabbing Neri's arm and pulling her into the shadow of a collapsed building. They pressed themselves against the cold concrete as the drone hovered overhead, its searchlight sweeping across the debris. "Stay still," Jake whispered. Neri didn't need to be told twice. The drone lingered, scanning the area. If it detected movement, it would alert nearby ground forces, and their escape would turn into a death sentence. Seconds dragged into eternity. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the drone drifted away, its lights fading into the night. Jake exhaled sharply. "They are looking for survivors," he muttered. "Then we need to move faster," Neri replied. She pushed off the wall, ignoring the burning in her muscles. They had wasted enough time. If they didn't reach the communications array soon, the data would never see the light of day. And the war would continue. They pressed forward, weaving through the ruins, their pace quickening with each passing minute. The city felt like a labyrinth of destruction, each street a potential trap. Then, in the distance, the low rumble of engines sent a fresh wave of dread through Neri's chest. "They are close," Jake said grimly. She didn't need to ask who he meant. The hunt had begun. They reached the edge of the city just as the first lights of dawn began to creep over the horizon. Beyond the ruins, the land opened into a barren wasteland, an expanse of cracked earth and jagged rocks stretching for miles. No cover. No hiding places. Neri clenched her fists. "We'll be exposed out there?" Jake nodded, scanning the area. "I know. But we don't have a choice." Their only hope was to reach an abandoned outpost on the other side of the wasteland. From there, they could access a hidden transport route leading to the communications station. But it was a long way to run. And their pursuers weren't far behind. A distant explosion echoed through the ruins. Then another. Jake's grip on his weapon tightened. They are clearing the city, forcing survivors into the open. Neri swore under her breath. Their enemies were smarter than she had hoped. The patrols weren't searching, they were herding. Straight into a kill zone. "We move now," Jake said. They sprinted. The cracked earth crunched beneath their boots as they pushed forward, each step bringing them closer to safety or death. The sky above them was vast and empty, offering no protection from the eyes watching from above. Then, a sharp whine cut through the air. Blaster fire. A bolt of energy struck the ground inches from Neri's feet, sending up a spray of dirt and smoke. She threw herself forward, rolling behind a jagged rock just as another shot whizzed past her head. Jake hit the ground beside her, cursing. Snipers. Her heart pounded. How many? Too many. More shots rained down, forcing them lower. Their enemies had the high ground, and if they didn't move soon, they would be pinned down. Neri's mind raced. Then she saw a collapsed structure half buried in the earth, a tunnel leading beneath the wasteland. It was risky. They had no idea where it led, or if it was even stable. But staying here meant certain death. She pointed. There. Jake followed her gaze, nodding. Go. They broke into a sprint, dodging gunfire as they made for the tunnel. The snipers adjusted, their shots growing more precise. Then, just as they reached the entrance, a blast tore through the ground behind them, sending them flying. Neri hit the dirt hard, the impact knocking the air from her lungs. She struggled to push herself up, ears ringing. Jake grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the tunnel. "Move!" he shouted. She didn't argue. They dove inside just as another explosion shook the ground above them, sending debris cascading down like a deadly waterfall. Darkness swallowed them whole. For a moment, the only sound was their ragged breathing. The tunnel stretched before them, a yawning abyss of shadow and stone. Jake pulled a small light from his belt, illuminating the narrow path ahead. Dust swirled in the air, disturbed by the recent collapse. Neri pressed a hand against the wall, steadying herself. That was close. Jake let out a humorless chuckle. Too close. They had escaped for now. But their enemies wouldn't stop. And if they didn't reach the communications array soon, everything they had risked would be for nothing. Neri met Jake's gaze. "We keep moving," she said. Jake nodded. Agreed. Together, they stepped forward, deeper into the darkness. The pursuit was far from over. And the real battle had only just begun. The darkness pressed in from all sides, thick and suffocating, as Jake and Neri moved deeper into the tunnel. Every step forward felt like a step into the unknown. The only light came from Jake's small wrist-mounted beacon, casting faint shadows against the rough, uneven walls. Dust still hung in the air from the collapse behind them, the lingering scent of scorched rock mixing with the dampness of the underground. The sound of their footsteps echoed in the confined space, each crunch of dirt beneath their boots a reminder that they were trapped beneath tons of earth and stone. Neri ran a hand along the wall, feeling the cool, jagged texture beneath her fingertips. "How far does this go?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jake kept his eyes forward, scanning for any sign of danger. "No idea," he admitted. "But if this tunnel was built during the old wars, it could stretch for miles. Some of these systems were designed as emergency escape routes." She frowned. "Escape routes for whom?" Jake hesitated. "The ones who saw the war coming before it began." That answer sat heavily between them. The war had been engineered. And now they were running through the remnants of a world built on lies. They pressed on, the tunnel sloping downward. The air grew colder, the silence stretching unnervingly long. Even the distant echoes of the battlefield above had faded, leaving only the rhythmic sound of their breathing. Then, a faint tremor rumbled through the ground beneath them. They froze. Jake instinctively reached for his weapon. Neri did the same. Another tremor, stronger this time. A deep, resonant vibration, like something massive shifting in the depths of the earth. Neri glanced at Jake. "That's not just the battle above, is it?" Jake shook his head. "No. Something's down here." They moved cautiously, the passage narrowing as they pressed forward. The rough stone walls gave way to something smoother, almost metallic. The air had a faint hum to it, an unnatural energy lingering just beneath the surface. Then, they saw it. The tunnel opened into a vast underground chamber, its ceiling lost in darkness. Strange machinery lined the walls, ancient, rusted, but still pulsing with faint, flickering lights. In the center of the room stood a massive circular door, its surface covered in alien markings that glowed with an eerie blue light. Neri exhaled sharply. "Aouri technology?" Jake stepped closer, inspecting the markings. "This isn't just any bunker. This was hidden for a reason." Neri traced the symbols with her fingers, feeling the faint warmth beneath her touch. "It's a containment seal." Jake's eyes narrowed. For what? A sudden static crackled in their earpieces. Then, a voice. Warning. Unauthorized personnel detected. Both of them spun, weapons raised. The voice wasn't human. It came from the walls themselves. A long-dormant security system awakening after centuries of slumber. Containment breach detected. Initiating lockdown protocol. A deep mechanical groan filled the chamber as the massive door began to shift, gears grinding against years of rust and disuse. The glowing symbols pulsed faster, brighter. Then, the air itself seemed to tremble. Something was waking up. Jake grabbed Neri's arm. We need to move. But before they could turn, the massive door let out a final, thunderous clang, then slowly, ominously, began to slide open. Beyond it lay a darkness deeper than anything they had ever known. And within that darkness, something moved. The chamber filled with a low, pulsing hum as the ancient door slid open. A gust of stale, frigid air rushed out, carrying the scent of metal, dust, and something else, something foreign. The glowing symbols on the walls flickered violently, casting erratic shadows. Jake and Neri instinctively stepped back, weapons raised, their bodies tense with anticipation. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, the darkness inside shifted. A faint blue glow flickered within the depths, followed by a sound like something vast and slow stirring after a long slumber. The floor beneath their feet vibrated as the unseen presence moved. Jake swallowed hard. I don't suppose this is just another old security system coming online. Neri's markings pulsed rapidly, a clear sign of her rising anxiety. No, this is something else. A deep, resonant voice, layered with static, echoed from within. The language was old, distorted by time, but Neri's sharp intake of breath confirmed she understood it. It's a greeting, she murmured. But it doesn't make sense. It's welcoming us as. Before she could finish, the glow intensified, revealing a massive figure emerging from the shadows. It was humanoid in shape but towering, its form made of interlocking metallic plates infused with flickering energy. It moved with unnatural fluidity, stepping past the threshold with a grace that defied its size. Jake tightened his grip on his weapon. Friend or foe? The entity tilted its head, studying them with eyes that burned like dying stars. Then, in a voice that sent a shiver through both of them, it spoke again, this time in a fractured but understandable dialect. Designation, Sentinel of the Lost. Purpose, preservation. Neri took a cautious step forward. Preservation of what? The Sentinel's glowing eyes locked onto her. The knowledge of what was. The warning of what is to come. Jake exchanged a glance with Neri. This was no ordinary relic. This was something far older than the war, older than any history they had uncovered. What happened here? Jake asked. The Sentinel's gaze seemed to pierce through them, as if measuring their worth. Then, it extended an arm toward the chamber beyond. See for yourselves. Hesitating only for a second, they stepped inside. The moment they crossed the threshold, the walls around them came to life. Holographic images flickered into existence, forming a panoramic vision of a long-lost past. They saw towering Aouri figures standing alongside humans, not as enemies, but as allies. Cities that had never been recorded in history, blending both cultures seamlessly. Science and technology flourishing in ways they had never imagined. And then, the fall. The images shifted, showing an unseen force ripping through those cities, turning them to dust. Weapons unlike anything either of them had seen before. A war not started by humans, nor Aouri, but by something else, something that had been buried, erased from records. Jake felt his stomach tighten. We've been fighting the wrong war? Neri's voice was barely above a whisper. We were never the real enemies. The sentinel spoke once more. The cycle repeats. The architects of conflict still move unseen. You stand at the edge of revelation. A sudden tremor shook the chamber, the images flickering violently. The sentinel turned its gaze upward. You are not alone. They are coming. Jake instinctively reached for Neri's hand. We need to get out of here. The sentinel's body began to glow brighter, its form shifting. The truth must not be lost again. It reached toward them, and in a flash of light, the entire chamber seemed to dissolve around them. And then, everything went dark. The world around Jake and Neri reassembled in a disorienting blur. One moment, they had been inside the ancient chamber, facing the sentinel. The next, they were standing in the open air, the ruins of the forgotten city stretching around them under the eerie glow of twin moons. The transition had been instantaneous, 1 second of blinding light, then the cool night air pressing against their skin. Jake exhaled sharply, gripping the nearest stone pillar to steady himself. That was new. Neri's bioluminescent markings flickered erratically as she tried to regain her balance. Teleportation, she murmured, still dazed. But that level of precision? Her voice trailed off as both of them turned to see the sentinel standing a few meters away, its metallic form pulsing with residual energy from the transfer. The ancient guardian had brought them here for a reason. The cycle must be broken, the sentinel intoned, its voice reverberating through the ruins. You have seen the past. Now, you must prevent its repetition. Jake clenched his jaw. You mean the war? The real war. Not between humans and Aouri, but against whoever orchestrated this mess. The sentinel inclined its head slightly. The architects of conflict remain hidden, but their influence persists. They thrive in the shadows, twisting history to their design. Neri's fingers curled into fists. Then why has no one uncovered the truth before? Why did our people never remember what really happened? The sentinel turned, gesturing toward a massive, half-buried structure at the heart of the ruins. Faint lights still flickered within its depths, remnants of an ancient power source. The knowledge was sealed away, it explained. Erased from records. Those who sought to reveal it were silenced. A chill ran down Jake's spine. If what the sentinel said was true, then everything they had ever believed about their history had been a lie. Neri squared her shoulders. If we expose the truth, will it be enough to stop the war? The sentinel's glow dimmed momentarily, as if considering its response. Truth alone is not enough. The cycle has repeated because those in power benefit from its continuation. There are those who will fight to maintain the lie. Jake exchanged a glance with Neri. Then we fight back. The sentinel stepped forward. If you choose this path, you must act swiftly. The forces that follow you grow nearer. The enemy knows you have seen what was not meant to be seen. As if on cue, a distant rumble shook the ground. Jake turned toward the horizon, his pulse quickening. Dark shapes moved against the sky, closing in fast pursuit crafts, their engines roaring through the silence of the ruins. They found us. Neri's eyes glowed with determination. Then we don't have time to waste. The sentinel raised a hand, and the air around them crackled with energy. Go. The key to unraveling the cycle lies within the structure ahead. Unlock it before it is too late. Before Jake could ask how, the sentinel vanished in a burst of static, its form dissipating into the night. Neri grabbed his arm. We move now. With the sound of incoming ships growing louder, They sprinted toward the ancient structure, its entrance looming ahead like the mouth of a sleeping giant. If the sentinel was right, then what lay inside could change everything. They just had to survive long enough to reach it. Jake and Neri sprinted across the uneven stone ground, their boots kicking up dust as the ancient structure loomed ahead. The air vibrated with a distant roar of pursuit crafts, their engines howling like hungry predators. They had mere minutes before the enemy descended upon them. Faster! Jake urged, grabbing Neri's hand and pulling her forward as the first streak of plasma fire split the sky behind them. The explosion sent a shockwave through the ruins, toppling smaller structures and spraying debris across their path. They are trying to bury us before we reach the entrance. Neri shouted over the din. Jake's grip tightened. Then we make sure they fail. The main doors of the structure were massive, weathered but still intact, sealed with an ancient locking mechanism. The symbols carved into the stone pulsed faintly with residual energy, responding to their approach. Neri pressed a hand against the markings. It's reacting to me? Jake glanced over his shoulder. The crafts were almost overhead, dark figures rappelling down from their underbellies. They had seconds left. Then open it, now! Neri's markings flared, and with a deep groan, the stone door slid apart, revealing a dark passageway beyond. Without hesitation, they dashed inside. The door sealed behind them just as the first enemy soldiers landed at the threshold. Inside, the air was thick with age, the scent of dust and something metallic hanging in the stillness. Pale lights flickered along the walls, illuminating a massive chamber ahead. Jake exhaled, resting a hand on his knee. We made it. Barely. Neri's gaze was fixed forward. Look. At the center of the chamber stood a colossal machine, its surface covered in shifting patterns of light. It pulsed with an energy unlike anything Jake had seen before. Cables and conduits ran from it into the walls, as if it were the beating heart of the entire ruin. Neri stepped closer. This must be it. The key to everything. Jake followed cautiously. The sentinel said this place held the answers. Let's hope it's right. As they approached, a holographic interface flickered to life above the machine, displaying unfamiliar symbols interwoven with Aouri and human script. Neri traced a glowing line with her fingers. This isn't just a database, it's a control center. The technology here is older than either of our civilizations. Jake frowned. You mean this wasn't built by humans or Aouri? Neri's expression darkened. No. Someone else created this. And they've been watching us for a very long time. Before Jake could process her words, the chamber trembled. The enemy had breached the entrance. Neri worked quickly, interfacing with the machine. I can extract the data, but it's massive, it'll take time. Jake drew his weapon. Then I'll buy you that time. As the first enemy soldier stepped through the doorway, rifle raised, Jake fired. The shot echoed through the chamber, and chaos erupted. The chamber shook as gunfire and plasma blasts erupted in violent bursts. Jake ducked behind a pillar, his weapon humming as he returned fire. The enemy soldiers moved with ruthless precision, their dark armor gleaming under the pulsating lights of the ancient structure. Neri worked feverishly at the machine, her fingers dancing over the holographic interface. Lines of alien code scrolled across the display, layers of encrypted data unraveling as she tapped into the core system. I need more time, she called out, her voice strained. Jake's jaw tightened as he fired another shot, dropping an enemy soldier before rolling to new cover. That's not something we have a lot of. More figures swarmed through the entrance, their formation tightening. They weren't just here to kill, they wanted the machine. Jake could see it in their movement, the way they advanced with controlled aggression, hurting him away from Neri. A grenade arced through the air, landing mere feet from him. With a curse, Jake threw himself behind a stone barrier just as the explosion ripped through the space, sending shrapnel and dust in all directions. His ears rang, his vision blurred, but he forced himself to stay focused. A shadow loomed over him. Before he could react, a boot crashed into his ribs, knocking the wind from his lungs. The soldier above him aimed his rifle directly at his head. Then, in an instant, the man's body convulsed, glowing veins of energy crackling through his armor. He collapsed, revealing Neri behind him, her markings pulsing with raw power. Jake coughed and groaned, "You could have done that earlier." Neri offered a wry smile, but urgency burned in her gaze. "I had to finish the download." "We have it, Jake." "Everything." The remaining enemy forces hesitated, clearly aware of the sudden shift in the battle. If Neri had accessed whatever was stored in this ancient place, then she was now the most valuable target in the galaxy. Jake grabbed her hand. "Time to go." They sprinted toward the opposite end of the chamber, where another doorway had begun to open, revealing a dark corridor beyond. A mechanical voice echoed from the walls, the language ancient yet strangely familiar to Jake's ears. "What did you do?" he asked, breathless. Neri didn't look back. "I activated the fail-safe." Behind them, the machine flared with intense light, and the chamber itself began to collapse. Stone cracked, massive slabs crumbling as the structure sealed itself. Enemy soldiers shouted in alarm, scrambling to escape, but the door slammed shut behind Jake and Neri, cutting them off from the chaos. Darkness surrounded them. The only sound was their ragged breathing. Jake reached for his light. "Please tell me you know where this leads." Neri exhaled. "I do now." With a press of her hand against the wall, the corridor illuminated, revealing a path ahead, one that had remained hidden for centuries. Jake smirked, "Despite everything, I really hope this doesn't lead to something worse." Neri's gaze was distant, the weight of the knowledge she now carried evident in her expression. "It leads to the truth." And that, Jake knew, might be more dangerous than anything they had faced before. The corridor stretched endlessly before them, its walls carved with symbols that pulsed faintly, reacting to their presence. Jake's fingers brushed over the etchings as they walked, feeling the energy humming beneath his skin. The air was thick, charged with something ancient, something alive. Neri moved ahead, her gaze sharp and determined. "This place was never meant to be found," she murmured, more to herself than to Jake. He exhaled, adjusting the grip on his weapon. "Well, lucky us. We specialize in getting into places we shouldn't." A sudden vibration ran through the walls, making the symbols flare brighter for a moment before dimming again. Neri stopped, her body tense. Jake frowned. "That's probably not a good sign." She turned to him, her violet eyes dark with certainty. "They are trying to override the fail-safe. If they succeed, they get in," Jake finished grimly. A low rumble echoed from behind them. The sound of stone shifting. Of something waking. Neri didn't wait. She grabbed his hand and pulled him forward. "We need to move faster." They ran through the twisting passageways, the architecture shifting subtly as if the structure itself were adapting to their movement. The corridor widened into a vast chamber, unlike anything they had seen before. Massive pillars of glowing crystal spiraled upward, illuminating the cavernous space. At the center, a pedestal rose from the ground, holding a spherical device suspended in midair, its surface swirling with ever-changing symbols. Jake slowed, his chest heaving. "Okay, that definitely looks important." Neri approached cautiously, her hands outstretched. This is the heart of the archive. The true record of everything the Dominion tried to erase. Jake wiped sweat from his brow. So how do we use it? Before Neri could answer, the air behind them shifted. A ripple of energy pulsed outward, and from the darkness, figures emerged. The enemy had broken through. Jake spun, raising his weapon. I really hate how persistent these guys are. Neri's fingers brushed the sphere, and instantly, the chamber flared with light. A voice, not one of flesh, but of something greater, resonated through the room. Who seeks the knowledge of the forgotten? Jake blinked. That's creepy. Neri steadied herself. We do. The war must end. The truth must be known. The voice considered her words. The truth is a burden. Once carried, it cannot be set down. Jake tightened his grip on his weapon as the enemy soldiers moved closer. We don't have time for riddles. Neri turned to him, urgency in her voice. We have to accept it. Together. She extended her hand. Jake hesitated only a second before taking it. The moment their hands met, the sphere released a wave of energy, washing over them in a blinding cascade. Visions flooded their minds, memories of the past, the secret manipulations that had fueled the war, the betrayals hidden beneath layers of deception. And at the core of it all, the true enemy. Jake staggered back, gasping. It was never just the Dominion. It was them. Neri's markings pulsed wildly. We have to stop this. Now. The enemy commander stepped forward, his weapon raised. You won't leave this place alive. Jake exhaled. Yeah, see, I was hoping you'd say that. He pulled the trigger, and the chamber erupted into chaos once more. The explosion tore through the chamber, sending a shockwave of energy cascading across the room. Jake and Neri were thrown backward, their bodies colliding with the cold stone floor. The glowing sphere pulsed wildly, flickering as if struggling to maintain its integrity. The enemy soldiers were momentarily stunned by the blast, giving them a precious few seconds. Jake groaned, pushing himself up. His ears rang from the impact, but his focus remained sharp. Neri, are you okay? She coughed, shaking off the disorientation. I'm fine. But we need to move now. The sphere, the ancient archive of truth, hovered erratically in the air, the weight of its knowledge pressing into Jake's mind. He had seen things, horrors, betrayals, the invisible hands that had shaped the war from the shadows. And now, those same forces were coming to silence them. The enemy commander, still standing amidst the chaos, barked orders to his remaining soldiers. Kill them. Destroy the archive. Jake grabbed Neri's hand, pulling her toward the sphere. We can't let them erase this. If they wipe the archive, all the evidence is gone. Neri nodded, her markings pulsing with urgency. We have one option left. The chamber trembled again as more soldiers poured in, weapons raised. The fight was becoming impossible. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and trapped. Jake clenched his jaw. What are you thinking? Neri looked at him, determination burning in her violet eyes. We merged with it. He blinked. Excuse me. She placed her hands on the sphere, and immediately, the energy flared, wrapping around her like living light. The archive isn't just a database, Jake. It's alive. It needs a conduit, a mind to carry its truth. Jake's stomach twisted. That sounds an awful lot like suicide. Neri exhaled, her expression softening. Maybe. Or maybe it's the only way to make sure the truth survives. Bullets and energy blasts ricocheted around them, but in that moment, the world narrowed to just the two of them. Jake saw the weight she carried, the impossible choice before her. And he wasn't going to let her bear it alone. He stepped forward, placing his hand beside hers on the sphere. "Then we do this together?" The sphere pulsed violently, consuming them in a surge of light. In an instant, everything shifted. They were no longer in a chamber but suspended in a vast expanse of swirling energy and fragmented memories. Jake gasped, trying to steady himself. "Where are we?" Neri's voice echoed beside him. "Inside the archive. The knowledge is overwhelming." Images flashed before them, histories rewritten, betrayals hidden beneath polished speeches, the architects of war laughing as millions suffered. The truth had always been there, buried beneath layers of deception. Jake clenched his fists. "We need to get this out to everyone." The archive responded to their determination, its energy converging around them. Voices from centuries past whispered, guiding them. A conduit must be chosen. A sacrifice must be made. Neri turned to him, understanding dawning in her eyes. "One of us has to stay." Jake's heart pounded. "No. There has to be another way." She touched his face gently. "If we both leave, the knowledge stays locked here. But if one of us becomes its vessel, we can ensure the truth reaches everyone." Jake swallowed hard. "Then let me do it." She shook her head. "You have to go back, Jake. You're the one they'll believe. A human carrying the truth that will force both sides to listen." Pain twisted in his chest. "I'm not leaving you here." Neri smiled softly, her markings glowing with warmth. "You're not. I'll always be part of this truth. And through you, it will live." Before he could argue, the archive's energy surged forward, wrapping around her like golden fire. Her form began to dissolve into the light, merging with the sphere. Jake felt himself being pulled away, back toward reality. "Neri." Her voice whispered through his mind, a final message. "Tell them the truth. Make them see." And then he was falling. Jake awoke to the cold, metallic floor beneath him. His body ached, his mind reeled, but the weight pressing on his chest wasn't physical. It was the knowledge, the truth imprinted into every fiber of his being. He gasped, his lungs burning as if he had been drowning in light, and for a moment, he wasn't sure if he was truly back. "Neri," he whispered, his voice hoarse. But she was gone. Not in the way that death took someone, but in a way far more profound. She had become the archive, the living vessel of truth, and now, that truth resided in him. It surged within him, vivid and unrelenting, demanding to be spoken, demanding to be heard. A distant explosion rattled the walls. The battle outside was still raging. He forced himself up, gripping the nearest console for support. The enemy's soldiers were still hunting him. The war had not yet ended. But it would. He staggered toward the exit, his mind buzzing with the overwhelming flood of history and revelations. Every conspiracy, every manipulation, every carefully orchestrated move by those who profited from war, it was all laid bare within him. He had no choice now. He had to deliver it. The comms panel flickered to life as he reached the control room. The resistance fighters were still holding the station, but barely. "Jake, do you copy? We're getting overrun." His fingers hovered over the controls. He had one shot. "I'm here," he responded, his voice stronger than he felt. "Patch me through to every channel. Alliance. Dominion. Civilian networks. All of them." "Jake, what?" "Just do it." There was hesitation, but then, the static crackled, and he was live. Across every screen, every audio frequency, his voice echoed. Across warships, battlefields, homes, and council chambers, the image of a single man standing amidst the wreckage of war filled the airwaves. "My name is Jake Carter," he began. "And I bring you the truth." The words poured from him, not rehearsed, not planned, but raw and undeniable. He spoke of the hidden hands behind the war, the deception that had fueled generations of bloodshed. He exposed the architects of destruction, named them, dragged them into the light. He revealed how both sides had been manipulated, how millions had suffered for the greed of the few. And then, he spoke of Neri. He told them of an Aouri who had once been his enemy, who had become his ally, and then something more. How she had believed in a future beyond war. How she had given herself to ensure the truth could no longer be silenced. "She gave everything so that you could hear this," he said, his throat tightening. "So that you could know what was stolen from you. Your peace. Your families. Your futures. But now, you have a choice. Do you let them continue? Do you let the ones who built this war walk free? Or do you take back what was always yours?" Silence. For a long moment, nothing but silence. And then, the first warship powered down its weapons. Then another. And another. Across the stars, battlefields quieted. Soldiers hesitated. Leaders scrambled to contain the chaos his message had unleashed, but the truth was out. The war, built on lies, had collapsed under the weight of its own deception. In the halls of power, there were arrests. Investigations. Confessions. In the streets, there were protests, voices raised in fury and grief. The tides had turned, and there was no going back. The war was over. Months later, Jake stood at the heart of Nova Aurora, the colony forged from the ashes of conflict. Humans and Aouri walked side by side, still wary, still healing, but together. He had done what Neri had asked. He had given them the truth. And now, they had a chance to build something new. As he gazed at the twin moons rising over the horizon, he felt a familiar warmth within him. She was still here. Not gone. Never gone. Together, he whispered. And for the first time in a long time, he allowed himself to believe.